helicopters off the
I do.
Are you having a day-to moment yet? Or are you sitting here and you're like, I can't hear. Okay, good morning, everybody. It is 10 o'clock according to both clocks, therefore it really must be 10 o'clock. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Tuesday, the 26th of February. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 10 a.m. and recognize that we are conducting our business today in Sloquet territory, and ask first, please, for a motion to adopt the agenda. Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed? Motion is carried. And we have the minutes from the regular council meeting held February 12th for adoption.
Move adoption.
Second. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions in the minutes? All right. Seeing none. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed? Motion carried. We have nobody who has signed up for the public comment on agenda items, but we do have 2 delegations today, so we are going to move right into those. Our first delegation is from Dr. Paul Hasselback, who is our medical health officer, and he has brought some guests who I will ask him to introduce. So Dr. Hasselback, you have up to 10 minutes, and then we have a few moments for questions, and we welcome you here and thank you for being here.
Thank you for your worship and members of council, and to your administration, who I know have been so wonderful this past year and previously, and your honored guests. I'd like to introduce a few folks that have come along with me, because I know this council is particularly interested in talking about all aspects of health, including health services. So Marcy DeWitt, who is the coordinator for the Alberta Clayoquot Health Network. Carrie Marshall, who's with the Division of Family Practice, and many of you who know. And I'm going to introduce to you Michelle Hanna, who is the new site director at the hospital here. She's got some functions on the Westcoast as well. And Janet James, who was filling in that role last year, is along doing some site orientation at this point. So hopefully we can answer some of your questions. This council, for the most part, most of you know that I try to make an annual visit to you just to sort of say hello. I do have some legal obligations that I undertake in doing so, but that fundamentally what it comes down to is that local governments have always been a major contributor to the well-being of the citizens that they serve, far more so than the formal health system itself. And we often forget that 25% of our health is coming from the health system and the health services. 75% is from everyone else, not all of it local government. So never underestimate what your contributions may be. As this is the first opportunity for me to meet with you following your election, some of you are familiar with your roles under the Public Health Act and other health legislation. Some of you may not be. I just wanted to bring back a little bit that there is a duty and obligation of local governments under the Public Health Act in order to identify, if they identify health hazards or problems that are occurring, that they should be notifying that as a problem. It's not a question around this table. I just wanted to remind you of your duties and obligations here. Providing information when it's asked for. One of the things I do remind is that you are expected to listen to advice that I provide you. Doesn't mean that you have to follow it, but it does mean that you actually have to consider it in your deliberations. We talk about a designation of a liaison. That is not something that still hasn't been formally put in place, but again, that was at a point in time where there really wasn't a clarity about how communications were occurring with local governments. And you can ask me to come and take a look at things that you believe are a health hazard. That doesn't mean that I'm actually going to act upon them. I think the city of Nanaimo found out that last year. But it does mean that I have an obligation to act on your behalf. While I'm hired by the health authority, it does not necessarily mean that I am an employee of the health authority and have to follow their obligations. I actually am appointed by the provincial government under order in council. And I have obligations to a whole variety of organizations, some of which are noted up in here. I must monitor the health of the population and report out on that. And I also have to be involved in activities of local agencies, not just local government, in terms of keeping you informed about what is occurring commenting on policies and changes that you may be undertaking that will affect the health of the population. And as I say, I am as much your employee as I am a health authority's employee. So if you need my services, you only need to ask. Generally speaking, if we talk about public health or key health approaches, we're looking at four main directions. One is just on the monitoring of health and health information, and I'm going to introduce those of you that aren't familiar with some of the access points that you can utilize. My office is quite willing to help if you have any questions. Certainly we talk about the promotion of health, and that is the positive approaches, often collaboratory, rarely when we get into use of legislation or orders or other approaches to ensure that health is in place. But certainly that third, in protection from health hazards, there is a set of legislative powers, responsibilities, duties that we can utilize, and our environmental health officers have been working very closely with your staff over the last year on both supporting some of your proactive activities as well as some of the reactive situations that have been occurring. And certainly there are some disease prevention activities, which really gets us into some of those individual specific services. There's a variety of other non-regulatory functions that I undertake, and I've listed them up here. I'm not going to go through them, but basically I am there as an assistant. Okay. An expert in certain areas. Oftentimes I find myself just trying to link people together, and I'm happy to do that because I don't have expertise in a lot of areas. And I do like to be sure that we have an emergency plan and response in place, and I raise that particularly with this council. You do have responsibilities under the community charter. None of this should be a surprise to you in terms of your duties and responsibilities, and they do extend to the health, safety, and protection of persons who are living and visiting in the area. There are other functions that I undertake, but it comes down to that concept of good governance. And we can get into great discussions about what does good governance mean when one of those outcomes is health. Not the only outcome, and I respect that. But certainly health needs to be brought into that conversation, so it should neither be the driver of your policy decisions, but also it should not be excluded from your policy decisions. If you undertake any sort of bylaw regulation, I will use something like the clean air, tobacco control legislation, or even if you get into the cannabis components, there are duties and responsibilities under the public health bylaws regulation, the community charter, that require us as a health authority to actually comment on those documents, and some expectation that there is a congruence with the health improvement benefits when you're undertaking activities that improve health. This rises from certain councils that actually undertook approaches that would preclude individuals from accessing certain types of health services in the past. So just so that you know what it's about, but you are still required to follow this. So if we get to health in general, it is often referred to as a complete state of physical and mental and social well-being. I think we put a lot of emphasis on physical, lately a lot of emphasis on mental, very little emphasis on the social well-being. But I like the second definition a lot more, which is about the ability of a group or individuals. So we can talk about the health of a community, to actually identify what they are trying to achieve and realize those aspirations, to satisfy their own needs, and to change or cope with the environment. Okay, that changing and coping with environment often distinguishes those that are in a healthier state than those that are in a less healthy state. When we talk about the determinants of health, names like diseases often come up. You've heard about risk factors, some of which you're addressing. When we talk about those determinants, they're the things over which the health system has very little control, but for which local government may be able to establish some of those foundations. One of the challenges we're always faced with, for those that haven't seen this slide before, is that any one of those, such as economic status or work or social supports, can have an influence on a variety of those risk factors, and those risk factors all feed into a variety of different diseases. So if we're talking about trying to reduce cancer rates in the community, and we start talking about why are we interested in early childhood interventions, there is a connection. It may not be that obvious, but it's also not the only outcome that we may be trying to achieve when we're talking about cancer prevention. An easier way to think about this is often we're on a long journey uphill called aging. And for those that are faced with more challenges in terms of living in poor housing settings, or perhaps having challenges in their employment status, that gradient that we have to climb up, pushing against whatever challenges we have, it becomes steeper and harder to do. And I think the duty and responsibility we all have is try to make that uphill climb a little bit easier for all of us. So just in closing here, I apologize on the time, I wanted to flag to you a couple of the hot topics that are out there, none of which I think are surprising. The overdose crisis, housing, cannabis legalization and what those implications are. Alcohol consumption remains a significant issue here that I'm going to show you. The early childhood indicators and adverse events of childhood, I think, is one that we continue to not necessarily be addressing adequately. Those simmering issues in terms of poverty and wealth inequity, or the inequitable distribution of the wealth within the communities. Climate change and health is becoming an increasing area of interest. Transportation and health is certainly something the West Coast has been looking at, but more broadly about what exactly does that mean in terms of contributing to the well-being of individuals when we have access to transportation. Healthy built environment. This is about the planning, the longer term, how do you set up your communities for healthier purposes. Healthier aging is coming back. I think that we've gone through a period of time where seniors perhaps haven't had the attention or emphasis. I expect that we're going to see that coming back again, about not just about how do we keep people from becoming sick, but how do we encourage those that are aging to thrive and contribute back into their communities in a healthier fashion. And certainly lots about family and family structures. You're all familiar with the Clayoquot Bio Trust Vital Signs report. I know it got presented to you in December. I'm not going to go through it. I just wanted to remind you. I wanted to remind you that if we're looking at childhood measures, we're actually seeing increases, which is not a good thing in terms of vulnerability of our kids starting school. These are West Coast schools, so this is not spread out over a larger region. So this is actually happening here. We're seeing that increase in vulnerability. It is reflected in most areas in BC. We can actually break that down, and I apologize on this. I just wanted to show you what sort of data we get to. But we can look at a lot of that increases in emotional maturity, and it's manifesting itself in aggression, lack of attentiveness happening in schools. And you don't need to talk to too many teachers before you find that they're going to tell you that this is the biggest problem that they're faced in the school setting, is behavioral changes that are happening with young kids. That's a reflection of a collective impact of what's happening with our communities in terms of supports to kids. And I think the challenge of all of us is how are we going to reverse that? We've talked about alcohol and drug problems increasing. I don't think I can understate for this region, the whole of the Alberni-Clayoquot, including the West Coast, the importance of alcohol as an over-contributor to poor health happening. And the challenge that I'm going to put out to you is, what does an alcohol policy plan look like for this community? I wanted to share with you what's happening with our overdose fatalities. The red line is what's happening in the Alberni area. So that includes West Coast and the Alberni Valley. We haven't seen much of a decrease from 2017 to 2018, but it's the first year in the last 5 years that we didn't see an increase. That's a positive trend. I hope that we're going to see some more positive trending happening going forward into 2019. But what we've often seen is that that has changed locations. And we certainly saw in 2018 too many incidents that occurred on the West Coast that were perhaps a manifestation of the overdose crisis moving a little bit further west. In concluding, these conclusions I brought to the Coming Together Forum for the West Coast last year. Very simply, West Coast health is average. Maybe a little bit better than average, but it's certainly not exceptional. There's certainly a cultural mix on the West Coast that is worth celebrating, and I know a lot of that celebration occurs. Tends to be a younger, more educated, more mobile population. That's got specific issues when we're talking about what types of programs benefit. Socioeconomically, the diversity is something that I think that as a community needs to be looked at. We talk about wealth equity and wealth, the distribution of wealth, where you get those wealth inequities that actually contributes to poor health outcomes in the long term. And while children have some benefits, they're not thriving to the same extent. We certainly have kids that are thriving, but we have kids who have a lot of needs in this area as well. Substance use is a problem. Maternal health remains an issue, and I think that this council, previous councils have all spoken up, and I encourage you to continue to do so. We've been able to look at access to care, and I know that's an issue, but when we look at access to care, access here is comparable to other communities as well, with perhaps the issue of residential care, and there may be some resolutions happening on that. But it's okay to speak up and sort of say that's an area that we think is a problem. And specifically for the community of Tofino, I've put up there some things that, again, are not surprises to you. Housing is perhaps the biggest issue in this community. I think number 2 is substance use. But I certainly wouldn't want you not to be looking at what is needed for youth, particularly children. And as we move forward into the climate change and adaptation, emergency planning, and cleaner air. And with that, there's a few additional resources that you can access yourselves. And I'm happy to take any questions, as I know that some of my colleagues will be.
Thank you very much. I just want to emphasize again, I know you've said this to you before, but I want to thank you for, you're so available, and your role of contacting and putting people in touch with the right people is a great description, because that's exactly what you've done for me many times, and I really appreciate it. So I really want to encourage council and the new members of council. Dr. Hasselback is a great point of contact into the island health system that I still don't completely and totally understand.
Neither do I, but I can try to find out sometimes. I don't ever expect any of us to know.
So, questions? Anybody?
You touched briefly on what does an alcohol policy look like for a municipality. Can you indicate towards other municipalities that might have one, or give us a general overview of even what that begins to look like?
Thanks, and through your worship. Municipal alcohol action policies are a term that sort of came out of Ontario. So I think it was really recognition. We got to start somewhere. Okay. Health authorities actually don't allow alcohol on their property or the consumption of it, though we're bringing that back in as a medicinal component. There's an example of an action policy. Okay, it can't be used for recreational purposes or any other function on the healthcare facility. BC Healthy Communities, which again is a great resource for all of us, including yourselves, actually have a section on municipal alcohol action policies. About once a year they put out a request for proposals, and you can actually get some money to do a little bit of planning. I know your colleagues to the south had started something. I don't think it really got too far. Courtney Comox Valley has been doing some work. New West has done some considerable work in the past, so I can actually come up with a variety of different communities. And it's not necessarily about precluding the use of alcohol. I got to stress that. Okay? But it is about sort of saying alcohol is an issue. What can we do that makes a little bit more sense? Okay? One of my favorite examples, and I'm picking on the NIMO just because I can do that, okay, because they know about this, is they have a hockey tournament where the free flow of alcohol during that hockey tournament for the participants, let alone the people attending there, has been part of that culture. That's one that perhaps needs to change. Okay, how do you go about doing that? Okay, and I'm not going to say that alcohol shouldn't be served. Okay, but perhaps maybe not as free-flowing in the same fashion as it has in the past. There are also other things that can be considered.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor McMaster?
Yeah, through the work I do at Loaves and Fishes, I know the health inspector went into Pools Land last year, and there's a lot of rumours going around. Got anything to say about that? I haven't seen anything official yet.
For your worship, I think that there are a variety of itinerant settings. Pools Land is just one example, where there's a minimum set of expectations from a health perspective that we should be looking at. And I think one of the challenges for these itinerant areas, are they campgrounds? Okay, they probably are, but if it's a campground, what are those minimum standards and how do we ensure that that's in place? Yes, we've had some conversations, and I think that we're going to see some more conversations, because there are some fundamental components with a few of those locations that actually aren't meeting a minimum standard. Okay, so how do we bring them up to a minimum standard given 25, 30 years of history?
I think Dr. Marshall wanted to
I'm
comment.
going to maybe add some clinical relevance to both those points. So say in terms of Pools Land, what we, I think, are facing increasingly more at the hospital is a number of patients, and usually they're transient, or no fixed address patients that fall between a hospital and the criminal and cells. And so we have patients that come in that we are providing accommodation for, essentially, and food that don't meet the, there's no medical need. We admit them for social reasons. They also don't have, they're not a criminal element to not having a fixed address. Police, don't want to be taking them to cells. And we are increasingly, I think, having more and more patients that there is literally nowhere for them to go. And particularly, so just as a thought process, if Pools Land were to get shut down or whatever that conversation is, where are we? There's no community housing, or no public space. There's no homeless shelters. These are things that that is becoming more of an issue for us. We don't have. I think we try and provide as compassionate amount of care at the hospital as possible, but we are getting an increasingly number of people that present to the hospital asking to spend the night. And so what our role in that is as the only sort of facility outside of jail cells, what our role looks like in that, I think, is something to consider. And then the sort of on the ground feel of alcohol in this community, I agree with Dr. Hasselback. You just cannot you cannot overstate the impact of alcohol on the West Coast in terms of both medical conditions, social issues, and accidents and injuries. There's been a number recently. That also, we provide an informal place for alcohol detox, so people that want to stop drinking in the acute setting. We have no formalized policy on that. Often over Christmas, we get 7 or 8 people at a time in the hospital that we are detoxing. I don't think that there's a lot of other hospitals in BHA actually that provide that service. And then even if you're going to detox someone, there is nowhere to go in the community to continue on with care with that. So the closest inpatient sort of residential care for alcohol is sort of Nanaimo and beyond. There's a little bit of services in Port Alberni. So we are sending people away for 3 months and then coming back to the same sort of forces that are contributing to the alcohol. So that is becoming it just feels like it gets more intense every year. There is very little services here on the West Coast that is very disproportionate to the concern around alcohol.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
My question's been answered.
Councillor Steer.
Hi, thank you. Appreciate the update. One of the things that we're presently working on is and this is through the Tofino Hospital Foundation, there's the delivery of healthcare we know has to change in the way that we do it here. And there is part of that is on facility focus, but we know it's much more complex and integrated. My question is, how can a municipal council help in developing that system moving forward?
Thank you, Worship, Councillor Steer. It's a great question. I'm glad you're asking it. Okay. I think one of the reasons for having Dr. Marshall, for having Michelle, and others here is that we need to be looking at a different way of providing primary care services. There is a significant movement at a provincial level on primary care reforms, primary care networks, patient medical homes. These are terms that are being bantered around within the BC context. I do say it's about the 5th or 6th iteration of primary care reform since the turn of the millennium. However, okay, each time we see an iteration, we see some change. Okay? I think that the establishment of the divisions of family practice and the primary care networks are part of the next thing. I think one of the things that local governments need to do is actually speak up to the health system and say we actually are interested in ensuring that we are being able to access not so much about the tertiary care hospital services. Okay, we're pretty good about providing that. And I'm not trying to negate my colleagues' opinions here. I think that where the gap is really at that primary care level, and ensuring that we're reaching out, ensuring that everyone has access to primary care, and that those that are being underserved are actually getting appropriate service. And that's where local governments really do come in, and speaking up first is the first step. Karen? Michelle?
I think an example of this might be some conversations in Ucluelet around supporting, increasing and expanding their community health services there. So you are not having somebody in Ucluelet come all the way over to the hospital for a urinary tract infection on a Saturday. Those kind of things, having physical therapy, somebody who is medically capable in Yuki is not driving 80 kilometers round trip to access physiotherapy at the hospital. So with to Dr. Hasselback's point, there's a provincial movement towards what we call primary care networks or patient medical homes, all sort of the same reiteration where you have wraparound community services and take the focus off tertiary care. And I think the health authority has really put a lot of effort in our area towards this, but just beefing up home and community care, in-house rehabilitation, in-home services, in community services, those kind of things.
Thank you.
So, Your Worship, if I could, I think Abby McPherson slipped in the back there is the executive director or director of the Division of Family Practice.
I'm the coordinator of the Long Beach chapter. We're a complicated division.
I just had a couple comments, and maybe in a bit in closing, and maybe it's a bit of a question too, but I have to say, in my 6 years of being the mayor, trying to navigate the system and understand the relationship between local government, the province, the health authority, has been one of the most challenging things to do. And for me, what it's really come down to a lot of times is just personal relationships, knowing somebody to pick up the phone and ask a question to, and then get directed to the right place. But building on Councillor Steer's question, I think it's generally been a frustration of the last two councils that I've sat on, amongst me and my colleagues, that we are looking for venues or other ways to have conversation outside of the council room that's not at the co-op when we're buying milk, and having a bit more formal dialogue and with our staff. So for example, I think of our recreation department and the interface we can have with Island Health and in tying things together, and there's so much benefit to be had from that, yet we're a bit locked into the way we do things, and we really haven't kind of come up with a venue or a way of having that dialogue on a constant basis. So if you've seen other municipalities or local governments that have that tool, or they're doing something, or there's some vehicle that they're using, I want to know about it so we can talk about it here at this table and see what we can do to change that.
So, Your Worship, local governments were intimately involved with health and health services. Often they were the initial people that put in hospitals, or they supported faith groups in putting in hospitals. They were often the organizations, and the medical health officers, public health, were always part of local government until about 30 years ago. Scary thing is I remember that. You're supposed to laugh. That health authorities have provided something that was an integration across distances that didn't exist previously. But under the community charter, and the way you have to do your business, I really appreciate it is a barrier to how do we have those discussions. Health authorities were structured, and I've been seen as saying this before, specifically to act as a buffer between communities and provincial governments. And yet health authorities are so broad and so vast that it's actually tough to have those conversations. I think that what you're asking is exactly what needs to occur. How do you have those local community conversations? Take it out of the context of your expectations under the community charter, okay? Which means how do you have an informal conversation? Is that something that Hospital Foundation can facilitate? Is that something that can be undertaken by a community group just coming together saying we're just going to have an open public meeting about health and talk about some of this, and then be active participants in that. I'm going to say I've seen other councils that are grappling with how do you have these informal discussions. I know from my colleagues within the system, they actually often don't have the, I'll use the word authority to speak publicly. So it's a challenge for them to have those conversations with yourselves as well. And I do know if you pull yourselves together, you'll probably come up with a solution, okay? And you don't need me to do that. You need to do it here in this community.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
very
for your
much.
time today.
Perhaps I'll see you next year.
You probably will, I hope. All right. Major change of topic now. And we have Tom Balfour from Central Westcoast Forest Society.
Hello.
Thank you very much for being here, Tom.
Thanks, Your Worship and Council. Nice to be here. Yeah, so I'm Tom Balfour. I work for Central Westcoast. I was just kind of asked to come here today and just introduce the organization to the new council and maybe talk about a few of the projects we're doing with the district of Tofino. And yeah, so we're kind of this organization with a funny name, and we work out in the bush. I find oftentimes people don't necessarily get what we do. And so I thought we'd try and explain it real quick in minutes. So here we go. So Central Westcoast Forest Society, founded in 1995, and this was kind of during that war on the woods and the protests and the big changes in forestry practices. And out of that kind of came, big sweeping changes to how logging was done. But this group that kind of founded Central Westcoast was like, okay, well, what about the damage that's already been done? You know, up until that point, we had 50 years of industrial logging, and a lot of the big watersheds were already destroyed, and we'd already seen declines in our fish habitat. So Central Westcoast was kind of conceived as this apolitical organization to get together and start doing action-based physical restoration projects of these damaged habitat, focusing on salmon. Also with the goal of putting these displaced loggers and fishermen back to work, right? Post-war in the woods and the shutdown logging out here, there's a lot of unemployed people. And so to try and put these skills to work in a positive manner was kind of where this organization came from. There's also a huge pot of provincial money for this stuff at the time, so it's kind of what got the ball rolling. And so it's kind of, the mandate is to sort of restore damaged ecosystems, rebuild wildlife populations, with the emphasis on salmon, but acknowledging that you can't just look at fish, you have to look at the whole picture. It's ecosystem based. And then inspire stewardship. We try really hard to connect people with their watersheds and with their fish, and we do that through our volunteering and education programs, and just think that's kind of a critical component of all this, complements the physical restoration. And then kind of like I said earlier, a big part of what we do is to try and create positive employment, right? I think for so long, anything environmental we decided it should be done by volunteers on the weekends and kind of mom and pop style, but I don't necessarily agree with that, and I think these problems, especially the ones we're dealing with, are really big, and they should be addressed by professionals working full-time towards these goals. And at the same time too, a lot of these remote communities we work with don't necessarily need a chance to go volunteer. They would like some work, and if we can put them to work in a positive direction, I think that's sort of a really important part of the society. And so how we do this, how we've been around for 25 years. So it's a nonprofit organization. We try and maintain at least one project with each of the 5 Nechalik nations out here, as well as one project with the district of Tofino and the district of Ucluelet, and we just try and keep these ongoing. And sometimes they range from small kind of rain garden school programs all the way up to full-scale watershed restoration projects. Just depends on funding availability, but try and be inclusive and work with everyone. Volunteer board of directors is kind of standard nonprofit, all sorts of backgrounds on there. Most of our funding comes from federal grants, some private grants, and then we kind of round that up with some corporate sponsorship and private donations and fundraising. This kind of work is really expensive, so we do need to dip into lots of pots. I think so far the organization has raised and invested over $25 million into habitat work and infrastructure upgrades on the coast here. And part of being an apolitical organization and staying away from like more activism type stuff and policy type stuff is we open ourselves up to be able to work with kind of a broad spectrum of funding partners, which has kind of allowed us to achieve what we have. Kind of really only drawing the line at fish farm funding, just because you have to make a stand somewhere, but for the most part we work with kind of whoever's keen. Just an example of some of our projects. This is from 2017. Things won't change a whole lot going into this year. But yeah, projects up and down the coast. Our territory is kind of northern Barkley Sound to the end of Clayquat, but we do have some work kind of up in Heshquid and Nootka, and then lots of work on the highway in the Kennedy Flats area. So some of these, like Effingham, we have a side channel project. Twin Rivers down there, we have a long-standing watershed restoration project. Out in English Cove, we've done a handful of culvert replacements. I think you've seen our little signs there. Tranquil is a new kind of early stage watershed restoration project. We have a long-running one up in Hot Springs. And yeah, just kind of a sense we have lots on the go, kind of different scales up and down the coast. And then across the bottom there, that's just the mandate of restoration followed by monitoring and education is kind of our wheelhouse there. So salmon, I don't think I really need to tell you about the importance of salmon on the coast, culturally, economically, environmentally, super important, and unfortunately they're not doing so well. Officially salmon have been in decline since the 70s, with odd pockets of certain populations doing better than others, but for the most part salmon are not doing well. And then this is kind of this, they call it death by 1,000 cuts. There's a bunch of different ways that fish are being impacted, but this is sort of a list of kind of generally accepted major issues: habitat loss and degradation, fish farming, salmon aquaculture, sport and commercial fishing, enhancement in hatcheries. This is an issue we've seen more and more, that hatcheries were once kind of held up as this golden ticket, who needs a river, right? We can just make more fish at the hatchery, but we're seeing all sorts of negative impacts this enhancement and over-enhancement has had, especially on our wild fish populations. And then followed by climate change and pollution, so a whole host of things affecting fish. And yeah, but when we're talking about Central West Coast, we're talking about habitat loss and then restoration, mostly to do with early forestry and then highway development is kind of our focus. And just like habitat restoration, it's not something we invented. It's a well-established field. It's a new science, but in the States, I was just down in Portland for a restoration conference. In Oregon, Washington, this is $1 billion a year industry, but Canada is far behind, and that's why this work is being done by charities, raising our own money. But so yeah, we didn't invent habitat restoration. It's just one of the ways we can start to rebuild our wild fish populations. And so real quick, what our project looks like. Well, I guess the goal, so when we're talking Central West Coast Habitat Restoration Project, you have to look at the approach is called like a holistic approach or a top-down watershed level approach, and acknowledging that yes, your problems and your fish live in the river, but the problems stem from upslope and they stem from the riparian forest. And so you have to address these issues all the way down if you're going to try and make an impact, a positive change to the river and the fish habitat itself. And so I'll just kind of walk you through real quick what a restoration project looks like. Starts at the top. These landslides, forestry-induced landslides is a huge problem across the coast, right? You have these steep slopes, thin soils, they're very wet. They were held together with old-growth trees. You take those trees off, you cut roads through it, you destabilize the whole slope, and then you end up with these massive landslides, which fill the creek with debris and rubble, which lasts for generations in that system. So that's Escalante Ridge on the left there, up near Nootka. That's looking down a slide at the Tranquil River, and this slide lands directly in the prime Chinook spawning habitat on the Tranquil there. And we're looking at the forest, a lot of these oversimplified, like changes in forestry practices, right? You could log bank to bank, you could plant whatever species you'd like. So we've ended up with these really simplified kind of monoculture, poor quality riparian forests. So we go lots of thinning, topping, planting, these things to address forest problems. And then we started looking at the river itself once you're kind of happy with the upslope stuff, the forest stuff. And this is a lot of channel excavation and wood placement and physically rebuilding habitat for fish in the stream. This is out at Conference Creeks along the highway there, where this creek was a road, or got turned into a road, and now I've turned it back into a channel. At the bottom of the line is the estuary, super important for Chinook and chum rearing. I spend a lot of time in the eelgrass feeding. And again, being at the bottom of the chain, all the same problems you see in the upper river and up in the estuary. So we do lots of eelgrass planting, wood placement, stuff like that to try and increase habitat in the estuary. And the last thing we're sort of looking at in terms of our projects is roads and culverts. Oftentimes when they built the road out here and they built the road anywhere, they didn't really concern themselves with the quality of habitat and like bisecting really important fish rivers. So we've gone through and replaced non-fish friendly culverts with ones that they can pass. And these are pretty good bang for your buck. If you have good habitat above and below and your access is the only problem, the culvert can really increase habitat quality there. So I've run out of time a little bit, but here's a quick slideshow. Just I want to give you like a general idea of the scope of the problem and then the scope of the work. So I'll just flick through these really quick, but just, you can see the slides coming off the roads up in Nootka there. There's a slide at a lost shoe, I guess, doing some bioengineering there. That's what a stream looks like post landslide deposit. It's the Ableo River, segmented pools, lots of gravel, no kind of defined channel. Same thing up at Effingham. There's another slide of lost shoes, some slope stabilization going on there. There's the Escalante River. You can see lots of bank erosion, debris deposits. There's that tranquil corner, again, unchecked erosion. Here's building some wood up at Hot Springs, placing some at Effingham, clearing wood out. Sometimes the creeks were used as waste wood deposits, so this is Kudois in the back of Grace Bay there. Pulling wood out. This is the jam removal we did up in Heshquit this fall, I guess in November, end of November. This is Hydro Hill, kind of a cool one where the creek had been pushing out onto the highway and they've kind of done some half-assed repairs, maybe 2009, and it wasn't working, so we kind of worked with the ministry. Okay, how do we keep this river from pouring out onto the highway while creating some quality habitat in there? And we sort of did this with this engineered pool riffle sequence that can better handle the flows of water and then at the same time create feasible habitat in there. That one's pretty cool. It's right beside the highway, that straight stretch when you're coming up to Hydro Hill from this side. This is the culverts out at Conference Creeks. You can see how a fish would never be able to pass that. There's another one. And then those are the two culverts we put in those places, going up and down. So obviously now the fish can get through. Okay, so that was real quick what a restoration project looks like and entails. And then so this is the stuff that sort of directly affects you guys. Currently we're working with April and Aaron and Ricardo on a project out at Centennial Creek. This one kind of runs from the wetlands up sort of behind the community center, down behind the school and under First Street and out behind the hospital there. It's got all sorts of problems, mainly having to do with being filled in, logs and garbage and stuff to bring up the land there. And apparently it used to be a good coho chum stream. People would fish in town here, but I mean, one day the dream is to kind of daylight the whole thing, but there's lots of problems to deal with before then. So we're just kind of working with Dave Cleft, the biologist, and trying to figure out probably some riparian work we'll do up near the new community center and then we'll hopefully continue pursuing work on this project till we can do what we really like there, but small pieces. Mackenzie Creek, this project is really early stages. The new campground owners kind of approached us with the idea that they'd love to do some restoration on that creek and they would even pay for it. But nothing can really go on there until that road gets paved. A lot of the problems do stem from the gravel washing off the road. So we've kind of started a little bit of assessment work there and kind of come up with a plan, but nothing will happen there until that road gets paved. And then highway projects. So this year is the first year in probably 5 years that we're not going to do a culvert replacement in the middle of summer and close the highway, which is probably good news for everyone. We have to do them in the summer because that's when you pose the least time to fish, but obviously it's a terrible time to be ripping up the highway. So we're not doing that this year. And then boat to tailgate. We just got a district grant for a little bit of money to help put on this fundraiser. If you're not familiar, we partner with the fish guides and a couple local restaurants. We throw a big seafood kind of barbecue party at the Trilogy Dock, and it's a fundraiser for ourselves, and then we split 50-50 with ourselves and the Tofino Salmon Enhancement Society, and usually brings in a good amount of money. We also have recently started putting a small chunk towards the CBT's Wild Salmon Fund, so trying to spread the money around, not just take it for ourselves. And then, yeah, so those are kind of the district projects, and then of course we have lots going on in Clayquot and back out on the highway. But we can talk about that stuff later if you guys are interested. And then the next kind of request I was going to make of staff going forward here is we're always looking for trees and root wads to place in stream, and it's kind of a limiting factor on some of our projects. And so I thought we'd talk to you guys, so when someone comes to develop and they're clearing their lot and they're looking to get rid of the trees, that maybe we could take them off their hands. So we'll approach staff with that kind of request. And then same with willow, we're always looking for a good source of willow. We use it for slope stability and bank stability kind of stuff. And I'm sure there's sections around town that maybe we could work with Public Works to do a little bit of willow harvesting. It's pretty non-invasive. I think that's kind of it for my Central West Coast in a nutshell.
And indeed it was Central West Coast in a nutshell. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Well, one thing I was kind of misquoted in your minutes there, your agenda. Someone took, it was a quote, they just took a small quote of one of the longer answer I gave to one of the community groups asking about Tonkin stuff. But I've got no problems with paving the road up to the community center. It kind of comes across like I do, but.
We'll just have to talk to the people who do the minutes.
Yeah.
Based on the letter that's coming up on your.
Yeah, so that's.
Thank you for clarifying that. That was like a little in-joke, but yeah. But anyways, let me say, I do really appreciate this because I think it's really meaningful when we have a nonprofit come and present to all of council so that we all get to hear it. And I know that we've in the past declined the opportunity to have a council liaison go to your board meetings, and this personally I feel is far more useful for us, and that we all get to hear it. And now I'm thinking about my yard and all the trees that fell over and all the root wads that are there.
We're always desperate for root wads.
I just met somebody 2 days ago who has a ton.
Perfect. See, so sometimes
Okay.
these things you just got to put it out
Yeah,
there.
I think we-
Any questions from members of council?
Not so much a question, just a compliment once again, and one of the things you talked about was your stewardship of youth, and I've been fortunate enough to be involved with some of the programs from Wicaninish Elementary, and that just to, I didn't see it in this list of updates and projects, but to continue that advocacy work with the youth is, I know on Lost Shoe we do some work there, and there's a little bit of habitat restoration that still continues. It is super effective. I can speak personally for my own kids and their enjoyment and continued advocacy in that area. So just keep that in mind, that it is beneficial and it does have impact.
Yeah, I think that stuff's so important, and I think we will continue working on into that Centennial project. Yeah, we have the Lost You one, and then we're doing one with the kids in UP2 at Big Beach. But yeah, super important part of the work.
Right on.
Great. Thanks very much
I have
for
a
coming.
question.
Oh, yes.
You mentioned in Oregon that restoration's $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
So what's the state's doing right that we should be doing?
Well, when I was trying to get to the bottom of that, where are you guys getting all this money from? And I mean, their federal Fish and Game is putting money into it, but they also, we're getting a lot of money from the dams. So we don't have that same kind of issue, but so these dams are generating income. And then a lot of the money was coming directly from their nations, where like almost everyone I talked to there was an employee of a First Nation, and they said a lot of their funding is coming from casinos that then they're flipping over and putting towards habitat work. It also sounded like their treaty process was quite a bit different in the way they dealt with fish and the allotments and the money, so the nations down there seem to have a lot more money to put towards this stuff, whereas like our First Nations partnership, we're usually bringing the money and they're supporting in other ways. But yeah, just their money.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Okay. So moving on to the correspondence section of our agenda, we have a letter from local resident Leah Ungstad with some perspectives on the proposed development at 565 Campbell Street. And I wanted to say thank you to our staff for talking to Bruce and getting the presentation online so that now anyone, all the members of the public can take a look at that presentation we had at the committee of the whole. Any comments or questions about the letter? Okay. And then our next letter is from a number of folks from the Tofino Natural Heritage Society regarding trees and green space and dark skies and climate change and a number of other issues. And in the cover email to their letter, they were very explicit about asking for answers to the questions that they closed their letter with. So at the end of their letter, there's a number of 5 questions, I think, 6 questions. Some of which I think are kind of bigger picture questions, and some of which are questions that I think our staff will be able to answer. So if you have any questions about the letter, let's talk about them now. Otherwise, I think we want to refer it to staff and ask them to answer the questions that can be answered. Any comments right now? No? Okay. So yeah, the questions, just to briefly go through, talking about lessening the logging required for the multi-use path extension and the trail route for that, the sewage treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant clear cut and the size of it, the connector trail where the outfall line will go, and another line up to the wastewater treatment plant about plans for trees being felled there, and asking a question of council what to do about trees if we don't have the means of enforcing a tree bylaw. And I think everyone knows that we have directed our staff to come back to us with more information about our significant tree bylaw and what we can do with it. And then a final question from the group about basically integrating climate issues into all of the planning work that we do. Okay, so I can't guarantee we're not going to cut trees down, and that's the way that it goes when we're building the wastewater treatment plant and the bike path and the connector trail. And I think we all understand that we're trying to do our best to minimize the amount of disturbance, but there is going to be disturbance, and that we're going to have to make some hard decisions that way. But other than that, maybe a motion to refer the letter to staff and ask them to write back to the letter writers.
Move that referred to staff.
Thank you. Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any questions from that then? Okay. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. All right. Moving into the reports, and we have a number of reports to move through today. And the first is, I had no idea it would be called this. The Percentage Additions Repeal Bylaw, number 1261, 2019. So now it will remind us of a conversation we had during our budget meeting where we talked about this issue, and we did not protest it coming forward to council, and now here you are to present it, so thank you.
Yes, thank you. So this report is, it includes a repeal bylaw for what's referred to as the percentage additions bylaw. And the name of the bylaw doesn't clearly explain what it has to do with, so I'll just provide a brief description of what that is. So the community charter allows council by bylaw to vary the tax due dates. And so the community charter states that taxes are due on July 2nd of each year. And then there's associated regulation that says it's the first business day in July, because July 2nd can't be the most reliable date. So if council wishes to vary that tax due date and impose penalties that are set out in regulation separately on other due dates other than July 2nd, then we're able to do that. And so that's what this percentage additions bylaw does. And so the percentage additions bylaw allows 2 tax due dates, one on July 2nd and one on the first business day in August. And our current tax penalty is 2% on July 2nd and 8% on the first business day in August. What we're finding now with the increase of our budgets and required tax flows or cash flows between January and the first tax due date is we're seeing a constraint on our cash flows and our bank balance. And so we're putting several procedures in place that are not established by council but by staff to ensure that we increase those cash flows in the earlier part of the year, which have to do with more regular grant reporting and reserve transfers throughout the year rather than waiting until later in the year to carry out those transactions. And one policy and bylaw that council does have the authority to manage is the percentage additions bylaw or varying the tax due date. And so that's why I'm coming to council, in addition to all those procedures, is to repeal this bylaw and make the tax due date July 2nd. And what this will do is it will also encourage the increase of tax flows in the early part of the year, which we're requiring at this time. So without the percentage additions bylaw, taxes will be due on July 2nd or the first business day in July. After that time, a 10% penalty will be applied.
Thank you. Any questions for Nala? No. It is clear.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you then. So it is moved and seconded that the District of Tofino Percentage Additions Repeal Bylaw number 1261/2019 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time. Any final comment? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed? The motion is carried. Thanks very much. Okay, the building bylaw. Lila's leaving the room. This needs for some very interesting and long reading. And just before you start, I want to say this morning at the Mayor's Breakfast, we actually did get a chance to talk about the Energy Step Code. So it was really great. And I asked the room if anyone had heard of it before, and they had not. So this is great. And we're going to hear more about it right now. And a few other things.
Thank you, Mayor Osborne. Morning, Mayor and Council. Today I'm going to give a fairly brief presentation on the building bylaw. I think the report probably provides a pretty good overview, and you guys probably have a number of questions. Nicholas will join us momentarily. He had an inspection to do, but should be here around 11 o'clock. And so if we have any really technical questions about the bylaw itself, Nicholas will probably be helpful to answer those. So, moving on. But I really love the bear. There's so many things that we can do. Building bylaw 1256. So this is probably, for me, about a 1.5 year long project. I had meant to get this council for a while now, but spent a bunch of time over the holiday to get it to council today and hopefully wrapped up by May. It was initiated through the change in the Building Act, 2015-2016, that required, that made some significant changes, which meant that we needed, or all municipalities needed to sort of review their building bylaws and create new ones or amend old ones. In our case, we decided to create a new building bylaw. Our insurance provider, the Municipal Insurance Association of British Columbia, developed 3 bylaws for BC municipalities, or for large municipalities, regional districts, and 1 for small municipalities. This was sort of a base bylaw, and that's what we used to create this, which is exactly how we created our previous bylaw. But as well, with this bylaw, we created policies to go along with it. So it's a step code policy, and then then a building bylaw policy itself, and then procedures, and then an application package. So this is similarly processed as we did with the subdivision development bylaw, because sometimes we come out with a bylaw, but we don't really tell people how to use it or how even for our staff to use it. So this is sort of stacked up so that we can have a very transparent process for the building community. Again, so I should say 1256. Bylaw 1256 comes from the Municipal Insurance Association. There's provisions in there for Tofino to move towards the step code requirements. There's a couple of bear smart provisions. We've been working with Chris McMillan, who was hired by Ocean Outfitters to develop a management plan, and so that management plan is pretty much done, and I've been working with Crystal to get information for this bylaw, but also for the OCP and the zoning bylaw. So I'm not going to wait for the OCP to come in, so we're introducing some of the bear smart provisions in this go round. Then again, as I said earlier, is the supporting policies, and then we looked at fees. They've stayed mostly the same. There's a couple of amendments, but I don't know that any homeowner will notice a change in fees. You may notice a change in fees if you're building multifamily or a step, what's called a Part 3 building, like a commercial building or a school or something like that. The building policy itself, so there's the building bylaw and then there's the building policy. Part of the reason in developing this policy was to provide the district with some liability protection. That's the second point. If you have policy in place and you follow that policy and document it, you're covered with what is called protected by liability under sort of a policy umbrella. It's called a policy defense. It's rock solid. So we wanted to make sure that the work that we do within the building bylaw, we're protecting the district long term. We also want to talk about safety, making sure our staff are safe, making sure people building are safe, and then just good governance to let people know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So that's the building policy. The step code policy, again, is something that municipalities will have to adopt by 2022 now. And so we wanted to put a policy in place that's presented to our community how we're going to get to 2022. And so there's a very simple policy about what level will be at what year. Again, it's phased. That's pretty simple policy, and I'm happy. I'm going to take questions on all this. I'm just going to go over it quick. There's some procedures. Procedures included for council's information, but this is sort of our day-to-day work. So this is the kind of work that our building inspector does and is familiar to the builders. It just sort of lays it out. So someone comes in and says, how does it work in Tofino? I've never built here. We can give them a procedure and explain how things are done. Procedures can be changed at a staff level. They're administrative documents. I just wanted council to see them now to sort of understand that there's more to this than just the policies and the bylaws. We've actually in the policy point towards these procedures to give, again, a little bit more liability coverage if we need it. Again, they can be modified at our level if they're required. I just wanted to introduce that. We don't have a procedure document today. We also have to amend other bylaws, so in particular the MTI bylaw and the bylaw notice bylaw, and that's our enforcement tool. So whether we want to enforce through municipal ticket information or through the bylaw notice process, we've proposed to amend those bylaws to match up with the existing bylaw, or the proposed 1256. So that's it pretty quickly. I know I've spoken to a couple of you about questions. I'm happy to take any questions about it. I can say from a very general point of view, this is not going to be a shock to most of our builders. The bylaw reads a little bit more complicated, but in essence, very similar. The fees are quite similar as well. The big difference being that we're required to have complicated buildings reviewed by a code consultant because our building inspector is level 1, not a level 3. And so the way that we're looking at this is that it'll be fee-based. So if somebody comes in with a complicated hotel, we'll go get a quote for them. They'll pay for that review, which we have to do. The other way to do it would be to take that money and then put it back on the taxpayer, so the district absorbs it, and then it becomes part of a taxpayer bill. So it's sort of a user-paid sort of system. That's multifamily Part 3 buildings. And the big other change, I guess, would be step code. So step code is an energy requirement. It's a performance-based. So people can build however they'd like, but they have to meet a certain standard. So there's a fair amount of flexibility in it. And what it basically means is you want a house that's insulated and very airtight. That's it, the ins and outs of it. You test it with a blower door. That's why it's called an energy audit. And you have an energy auditor who does that, provides a report. So it's basically one more step into the process. The proposal is in 2019 that we tell people it's coming and say it's voluntary. So, test your buildings. We're looking for some incentive programs. There's quite a few out there to help pay for the energy auditors. 2020 would be step 1, which is basically voluntary again. You test the house, but you don't actually have to meet anything. But again, it's getting people used to it. And then 2021 and 2022 would be step 2 and step 3, which is 10% better than it is now and 20% better. I can tell you that most of our builders, and particularly the ones that are very professional, are building in excess of 20% already. Nicholas was down in Euclid about 2 months ago doing a conference with all the builders and trades, and they did some tests on some houses that are getting built right now, and they're all passing. So I don't think this is going to be a big step for builders, and we have sort of 2 years where you have to do it, but it's not necessarily required. We're required year 20, but not required 2019. And there's ways to pay for it, but I don't think it's going to be that impactful to our community. And then we have to meet net zero by 2032, I think. So we have to start going down this road at some point. We don't have a choice, so it's either we wait to 2022 and say, okay, you have to meet this, or we can sort of bring it in slowly. So that's energy step code in a nutshell. but I should love taking it.
Thank you. Okay. Questions?
Aaron has answered a lot of questions already on this for me, and thank you very much coming. We had talked a little bit about the surplus fees that were generated by the building permits and where that sits in sort of a holding for future sort of maybe downturns in building. And last year there was about a 60,000 surplus. And I'm just curious if there's ever been consideration about lowering those fees. I know I think we count you about $900 on every 100,000. And just my concern always is the affordability of building, and this is another fee that is on. And if it's cost recovery, or if there is that ability to look at that rate, is it premature to even have a conversation about lowering it, or is it something that could be considered in that fee structure?
It definitely can be considered. We did touch on it. It's a bit. I don't want to say this. So we looked at the cost of building, and we realized we didn't really want to increase it if we couldn't. But we didn't really have the resources or the wherewithal to get down to define what exactly that is. Like, is it more like 700 per 100? Is it more like 600? And so, in the interests of conservatism, we decided to leave it where it is, so not to change it. From what I understand, and I'm talking to Director of Finance, is that the excess funds that we raise go back to future years of building inspection, the building inspection GL, to help pay for the service of the future. So the idea being is that if there's any spikes in building or valleys in buildings, that we're paying for the service. The service pays for itself over the long term, and that's kind of where we ended up. I think it's a good point. Like as we talked about, and Councilman McMaster raised last year about raising or reviewing fees. It's probably one that we could definitely take a look at. We didn't look at it that closely for here, other than we didn't want to make it too much higher. Yeah.
Thank you.
With the energy step code, if most of the buildings that are being built now and the builders are comfortable with it and we're already meeting, say, step 1 or step 2, is there any reason why we couldn't advance if there's no major dissension, is there any reason not to advance the adoption of the different codes and speed it up a little bit more?
So in the sense of going step 3 in 2020 kind of?
I don't know about that, but even going to step 1 later this year, or?
I'm not sure we'd be able to. I maybe can ask that this, but I'm not sure that we'd be able to do that internally, or if there's energy audit. Part of this we have to build. So what the province wants us to do is do this actually fairly slowly.
Right.
And they want 6 months notice before we do anything.
Okay.
Because what they're trying to do is build an industry at the same time.
Yeah.
And they don't want to shock the builders. So our builders are already, most of them are building to this or understand how to build to this.
Yeah.
But what we don't have is energy auditors. There are a number of people who are going through the process, and there are some in Tofino.
Yeah.
But no one's really set up shop. So the idea, and so if you bring them in from out of town, then you have to pay for transportation. So we're hoping that we maybe develop some local auditors or a company or companies that can do that. Mm-hmm. And then the way we haven't spent a lot of time on it, but we know that like through the CEA, for example, there's incentive programs that we can connect builders to, so that when they go into this voluntary process or even the step 1 process, that's covered, and so it encourages people, and then then that industry starts getting primed.
Right.
And then in 2021, it's step 2.
Got it.
That's kind of how we were thinking about it.
So something that I hear everywhere when you talk to people about building in Tofino and Ucluelet, and I'm not a builder and haven't got any experience in this, but you always hear how it's different here and you need to build differently here. So given that the step code is performance-based, it seems like there's a lot of learning that is going to go on here with our environment. And is there a way that a representative from the West Coast might go to the BC Step Code Council and participate in some of the dialogue with the province so that they understand better our environment?
Yeah, I mean, both Nicholas and I are part of the Step Code group for local government, so we have, I think, our quarterly meetings, and I've just went to my first one. I think Nicholas is also signed up, so we are involved that way. I'd also say there's a bit of a disconnect there. Okay. So what I'm learning, and Nicholas can fill in, is that once the builders out here who are against it, and our houses need to breathe, actually build one of these things properly, they switch. They turn on a dime. It's like, oh, this actually works for our climate. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about this, and that it's actually not that. It actually isn't that different.
It's what I hope to hear.
Nicholas, I think, would that be? maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what Aaron said. I mean, the whole idea that it's not that different out here. But what Aaron said is true, is that there are misconceptions about which building practices are best, and a lot of misunderstanding about mistrust of the newer building practices. So from what I've seen, these buildings that are being built to the step code, they take factors like our increased rainfall into account, and the buildings are being built very well out here. I think that it summed it up just fine.
I'll just maybe add 2 points to that, just to might help council understand, is from what I understand in talking to Nicholas and builders, is that you're not trying to keep the water out, because that's what rain screen does. You're trying to make sure that the hot, moist air inside gets out. Not rain coming in, and it's the hot, humid heat stuff that needs to get out. And so the one example I have is a builder that I know has always built the traditional way, and was, because of code, forced me to put in an HRV, stuff like that. Said, I make pasta, and none of my windows get foggy.
Right.
There's it's just fresh air all the time. And that's because the house he built was for himself. So he built the house, obviously had to, got there and like, oh, this is a better system, and then it sort of snowballs from there, I think is how my experience of it.
Thank you. Good to hear. Any other questions? All right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Let's turn our minds to a series of recommendations here. All right. So first is the introduction and first reading of the new building bylaw.
I'll move that the District of Tofino Building Bylaw number 1256, 2019, attached to Appendix 1 to the February 26, 2019 report to Council titled Building Bylaw 1256, 2019 be introduced and read the first time.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final questions? All in favor? None opposed? Motion carried. Okay, the second is the District of Tofino Building and Development Policy to be received for information and discussion, including the building and development procedure and the step code policy. So this is like a three-parter. Who feels like reading?
Okay, I'll move that the District of Tofino Building and Development Policy attached as Appendix 2 to the February 26, 2019 report to Council titled Building Bylaw 1256, 2019 be received for information and discussion, and that the District of Tofino Building and Development Procedure attached as Appendix 3 to the February 26, 2019 report to Council titled Building Bylaw 1256, 2019 be received for information and discussion, and that the District of Tofino Step Code Policy attached as Appendix 4 to the February 26, 2019 report to Council titled Building Bylaw 1256, 2019 be received for information and discussion.
Thank you. That's it?
I'll second.
Seconded, thank you. All right, any final questions? All in favor? None opposed? Motion carried.
Guess I'll take my turn. That the District of Tofino Bylaw Notice Enforcement and Dispute Adjudication System Amendment Bylaw number 1107-09, 2019, attached as Appendix 5 to the February 26, 2019 report to Council titled Building Bylaw 1256, 2019 be introduced and read a first time.
Second. Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed? Motion carried.
I'll do this one again.
Yeah.
The District of Tofino Municipal Ticket Information System Amendment Bylaw number 1088.06, 2019, attached as Appendix 6 to the February 26, 2019 report to Council titled Building Bylaw 1256, 2019 be introduced and read first time.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed? Motion carried. And just like that, a year and a half of work finally comes to council. Now the next phase begins.
I had a question that I should have asked earlier before we move on, but it doesn't influence the motions that we just made. But Is Ucluelet moving in the same step, updating their bylaw? Because the building inspector does work in both places.
For sure. We're going to align for sure on step code, and our efforts to educate the building community will be joint. I provided this information to Bruce, the planning director at Coluit. They just, I think last year, adopted a different building bylaw, or the year before last, before the MIA one came out. So I'm not sure Nicholas can answer that because he works down there on a weekly basis, but I think they're going to stick with theirs for now just because they did it recently. They do have ours now if they can talk about them maybe just copying what we have and amending it, but I don't know if Nicholas has...
It was 2014.
Was 2014.
Well, I believe.
Do you know that if he's looking at amending it, or?
I hope they are.
Yeah.
But and it kind of sounded like that's what they wanted to follow suit with ours, but I'm not sure if anything's changed in the last month since we saw it.
So the idea is there. Definitely the application package. We're actually taking some of Ucluelet's application package and combining it, and because Nicholas works in both locations, our inspection sheets have both of our communities on there, so we're starting to try to move together as much as we can. They've taken a good lead on step code as well. So.
Okay, Elise's turn. The District of Tofino single-use plastic bylaw.
So this is the first time that you've seen a bylaw come forward for your consideration, and I'll give you a little bit of an outline of how we got here and the approach that we've taken to this regulation, and steps for moving forward with the community and especially the business community, as this is a business license regulation. So the single use is the 2018's Collins Dictionary Word of the Year. I think it's a pretty timely topic, both locally, provincially, globally. This is something that's coming up more and more around the world. So the background to this issue is that in 2018 we received a direction from Council to move forward on regulations with plastic, specifically looking at plastic bags and straws. And that was maybe spurred on a little bit by the City of Victoria checkout bag regulation, which was also implemented in 2018 and withstood a court challenge, but is now, there's an appeal to that challenge, so we're monitoring that closely, and other jurisdictions around the province are moving in the same direction as well. So we've seen other island communities, Qualicum, Parksville, think about this, but only Victoria has a bylaw in place. City of Vancouver is looking at a larger strategy. And then there's a global movement, obviously. Canada, the United States, European Union, there are regulations sort of across the board targeting single-use items. And they vary in their approach, but generally it's becoming quite apparent that single-use plastics are an issue. So the problem, or the issue that we've defined for us, is the accumulation of plastic, and especially single-use plastic products, entering municipal waste streams or escaping that waste stream and then entering the environment, where they break down into small unrecoverable pieces called microplastics, or depending on what it is that's breaking down. And so both of these impacts have a risk to the municipality in that they are accumulating in our solid waste systems, as well as on our beaches, or our rivers, or our streets. And so there's an impact either way, whether we're collecting them or not. So source control is what we're really talking about. And then of course, like I said, globally, people have recognized this as an issue all around the world. Awful statistic that I came across was that the World Economic Forum suggested that by 2050, the world's oceans will contain more plastic by weight than fish. Hard to say if that's just a big decline in fish or lots of plastic. Either way, people are talking about it. So on the West Coast, we've started this process with the District of Ucluelet as well. So this is a bit of a joint approach that we're taking. And there are a few issues that we've identified, how single-use plastics are affecting us as a municipality or as a region.
So currently plastic bags are not accepted in curbside recycling, meaning that there's a bit of a barrier there, and the strategies that have been used to divert plastics from our waste streams are maybe not working as well as they could. So any reduction that we can see is going to help the total waste amount that we see in our landfill. And then of course we're a region that's impacted by tourist activity, and that does increase the amount of just products that are used generally on the coast. So the stat that is put out there is that Canadians use about 200 plastic bags a year, and it's a little bit hard to estimate on the coast whether that fits or not, but I'd say it fits fairly well, just taking tourism into account. Whether our residents are reducing their consumption, it may be replaced then by tourist consumption of single-use plastics. And then just to put it in context of the region and our ability to handle this type of waste, looking at the annual reports of the Alberni-Clayoquot Westcoast landfill, it's estimated that the landfill will reach its capacity at 2068 at current filling rates. And so really taking a lens to this of how are single-use plastics affecting our municipal services. This is definitely one way in which any reduction will benefit the region as a whole. So you can see that plastics are the third largest component of our residential waste on the coast, organics being number one, which is sort of another issue, paper, and then plastics. But I think it's important to see paper there, and that'll sort of inform the rest of our discussion. So the regulatory approach that we're taking is not just a ban, but also a minimum price on paper and reusable bags. And that sort of goes back to this previous slide where we see paper is actually quite a high component of our waste stream right now. So we're not just trying to reduce plastics, we are trying to sort of need to recognize that there is an impact of all single-use items, and single-use paper bags also have impacts. And so, like I said, we're trying to mitigate the dangers of plastic that obviously break down into inert pieces and then pose a danger to wildlife, but also paper, which uses more greenhouse gases to produce, more water, and then there are issues around how much recycled content is in the paper bag if you're trying to mitigate the environmental impacts. And then of course, reusable bags, we've also put a minimum price on those as well to really reduce the risk of an overconsumption of reusable bags, which have their own issues associated. Obviously not very recyclable at the end of life, and so just end up in our waste streams as well. Other reasons for this approach, we've heard from the community that the use of single-use plastic or single-use items generally is not supported or not aligned with how our community sees itself. We've heard that in multiple surveys. Surfrider has done some great work with the business community, and then also aspirational, just for many people, a ban on these certain items represents a change that they're willing and waiting for. So our approach, we've used our authority to regulate businesses, and that's following on Victoria's approach. Again, we're monitoring their appeal in the courts. It does prohibit businesses from providing or selling a plastic bag or straw. It provides exemptions for size and safety. We are avoiding biodegradable and compostable plastic bags, so those are not permitted under this bylaw either, as they pose similar risks to our waste streams and environment. They just break down into other inert, smaller plastics. We don't have the right recycling or composting facilities on the coast. We're trying to avoid the rebound to excessive paper and reusable bags by adding a minimum price. And we're permitting plastic bags to be distributed that have already been used by a customer. So this is in recognition of the programs that Surfrider has undertaken to sort of provide a bin or a box where you can take your plastic bags back to the co-op and people can keep reusing them. We're not trying to ban everything and trying to be somewhat reasonable. And then using educational campaigns and partnerships with existing organizations. So I think I've mentioned Surfrider a few times, but I should really hammer home how integral they are to this project. I know Lily's here today, which is great. They've been so supportive in providing just comments as well as real contributions to the project. So these are the exemptions that we're proposing for size and safety. So loose bulk items, you can think your nails at the hardware store. I don't know, if we had a bulk section at the co-op, that would be permitted. And to wrap meat, whether it's fresh or frozen, fish as well, so that could be sport caught fish or fish from the grocery store, flowers, baked goods and non-packaged foods. So if you go to a bakery and they've got a paper bag around your bread, you don't have to pay 25 cents for that paper bag. Prescription drugs, just to protect privacy, and large items that don't necessarily fit into a reusable bag. Straws are the other component of this bylaw. So currently no one else has banned straws in BC. Of course, around the world there are different examples. Vancouver and Victoria are working towards this, and Qualica stopped working on it. But there are some models that we've looked at. And looking at Vancouver, we were really kind of slowed down to look at the impact on accessibility. So you may have heard that people with musculoskeletal disease or
musculoskeletal disorders.
Sure. They may need to use a straw, and we're really trying to mitigate any negative impacts on the public. So we're allowing for reusable and compostable straws to be sold or distributed for free at restaurants, but no plastic straws. And then, of course, patrons can bring in their own straws if they want to or need to. The plan for moving forward. Tonight will be our first real consultation with the business community at a chamber event. We're sort of trying to build on the success of Surfrider. They've done so much outreach to our business community already. We have a few businesses that even provide plastic straws anymore, and paper bag or plastic bags too. So the nuts and bolts are really a little bit around exemptions or fees for bags, but we see a lot of support already, and then we're going to partner with the chamber. Tourism Tofino is going to help us out with some marketing, and of course we want to do this jointly with the District of Clulet so that we have the same regulations in both communities. For the phasing of implementation, we've looked at a 6-month implementation period, and then enforcement would start next year. And this is just sort of an overview of what we're thinking for engagement. I think there's a communications plan attached to the agenda, but events with businesses, direct mailouts, dedicated webpage, FAQs. This is a big shift. I mean, I know that a lot of people are doing this already, but we do have quite a bit of work to do to make sure that this is implemented well. And then the timeline. So right now we're sort of in the drafting and getting this in front of you stage, and then we'll move forward with a lot of stakeholder consultation and any revisions or amendments and legal reviews that have to happen. Future considerations, like I said, we're looking at the appeal on Victoria's checkout bag regulation. And then there might be a role for council or just the community to play in advocacy. So this is a difficult thing for every different municipality to take on a different way to regulate an item. That's not ideal. So generally, this is how things start. They sort of build momentum, and then maybe the province or federal government takes on a strategy that would really take this off of our plate and just make some clear-cut rules, but that does take advocacy on your part. So if ABICC or UBCM is a venue for that, and then looking at internally or more locally how how does this align with whatever strategic goals you might have for the rest of your term? As I said, these are just 2 items, and we have a lot of solid waste issues that are sort of under the surface right now, so just something to think about as you move forward. There you go.
Thank
Questions, comments?
I have one question from the report. There was a spike in, or an increase, quite a big increase in the landfill, the amounts about, I want to say 4 years ago. I was wondering if there's any sort of correspondence to increased beach cleanups and stuff like that. If that was...
I don't know any correlation.
I think it started with the clearing of Jack English's land.
Yeah, there's a lot of
but yeah, that's really good.
Other types of waste in there, for sure. So I just really picked out the residential types of waste, but I didn't really touch on construction waste, which makes up a huge portion. So you could see a construction boom really influencing those numbers as well. It's a fairly large portion of our waste right now. Yeah.
Just once again, thank you so much and for the work on this, and it's a great first step. I had a question in terms, and I think it was almost answered. I think, is there, and I didn't do a lot of research, limited. Is there a regional strategy for our waste management? As I can see, it's great that we're working collaboratively with UCLULID on this specific one, and I know Vancouver is on a zero waste management sort of thought, and through, I guess, our regional partners in the ACRD and, of course, UCLULID and other. Is there a waste management strategy that you're aware of that we can be building on as this, I see as one component of a much larger sort of issue?
Yeah, so I think there's a solid use waste strategy that this is the year that actually gets reviewed, and the mayor would be the best person to ask about that as a representative on the regional district.
There is a solid waste management plan that governs how waste is handled at the landfill and how recycling, etc., is done. We are woefully inadequate, I think, in this region compared to other regional districts. We are one of the least progressive regional districts when it comes to diversion of waste from the landfill. But that solid waste management plan is up for review, and that process will start later this year. So I've already had conversations with the regional district board and staff about how important that is to our region. And I think that Tofino and UCLULID as municipalities are really in the driver's position here. The more work we can do with the community to say we want to do these things, the more likely the regional district is going to be able to amend the solid waste management strategies as well as the bylaw that governs what can and cannot be tipped at the landfill. And it's a great question, and I'm glad you're thinking about it. Yeah.
It was a leading question.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
My read of the bylaw is such, is there anything that would prohibit a business from using a deposit system for reusable bags? Like, say, the co-op wanted to charge $3 for a reusable bag, but was willing to take it back and refund somebody the $3 or $2 or something like that, so that it could be encouraged to be reused.
I'd have to read the provisions a little more closely to see if that would be allowed under the scheme. I mean, notionally, I don't think that's a bad idea, and it's something we can sort of.
And then, yeah, maybe it's something we can talk to the public and to the businesses about. The other question I had was, and this, I'm not suggesting this change be made, but in my research about bottle deposits, because of a letter somebody else wrote us, what I learned is that in 1971, when BC became the first province in Canada to institute a refundable bottle deposit system, it set the fee for pop cans at 5 cents. And today in 2019, the fee is still 5 cents. And in 2019 dollars, it should be 30 cents. And so there's a bit of a movement afoot to say to the regulators that we need to increase the deposit system. But I would assume that in time, this is something that this bylaw could be reviewed, and then fees for bags would be changed as appropriate.
Absolutely. So the starting point that we've got for fees right now is actually at the high end. It's an interesting question. So I came at this with the idea or the perspective that fees are a disincentive. That is what we're using them for in this case. We're using them as a disincentive to over-consuming bags. But we also have to take into account affordability and access and just slow incremental change a little bit. So Victoria started with a 10-cent paper bag, $1 reusable bag fee. And it was their intention this year, January, to raise those fees. But they amended their bylaw to go back and give even more time at the 10 and $1. And we started where we thought they would be, because right now they should be at 25 to $2. But they have issues implementing their bylaw. They've got a lot more fast food restaurants. They've got a few trickier segments of their business community that they have sort of slowed the implementation. So I don't want to go too quickly, but I think that we can start where they should or would have been at 25 and 2, and just sort of gauge with our own community how that feels. So tonight, speaking with business owners, that it is a question: how do these fees feel to you? And of course, it's not something that gets remitted to the municipality. This is a fee that just gets kept by a business. But yeah, fees will be looked at.
Yeah.
Sure.
Is it, I can't remember, are we permitted in a bylaw to say this bylaw will be reviewed in 5, or the fees will be reviewed in, 2025 or something like that, as a reminder to future councils? Or
Yeah.
just trying to avoid whatever the fees are set at, trying to avoid what's happened with the bottle deposit thing, where
Right.
suddenly 40 years goes by, 50 years goes by almost, and there's been no change.
Yeah.
And so the result there is that it's not as much of an incentive anymore as it used to be.
Let me
Anyway,
think
something to
about
think about. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
I had one question.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if there's been any thought given to moving away from reusable bags that also are like the synthetic ones that don't decompose. Because eventually they become waste that we have to deal with forever and ever too. And I just had an idea that possibly this could be presented or run by the business community when we're consulting with them, of using the money that's collected, or maybe not all of it, but part of it, because businesses have to pay for the bags that they would supply, but using some of that to sort of put back into sort of upgrading to a cotton or some kind of a compostable bag, that it could sort of subsidize the cost of it, because they're probably more expensive than synthetics. But then the whole collection of fees, I think would go over better if it's moving towards some goal. I think it would encourage, whatever, it'd be more acceptable, I think, for the people paying for the bag and for the businesses charging for them, if that money was sort of going towards something, I think. Anyways, just throwing it out there.
It's a good comment. We've had discussions with the co-op as well as CERMAC. Interestingly, they have an initiative to make a lot of reusable bags and sell them. And in speaking with their representatives just recently, they indicated that they would be donating 100% of the profits of those to local charities involved in cleanups. So whether that's the Clackwood Cleanup Initiative, or there's a nonprofit surrounding that initiative, or Surfrider. So there has been some discussion amongst the business. It would be a voluntary, obviously, initiative to donate those fees, but it's something that we can suggest to the community or the business community when we propose this to them. And then as far as different types of materials, that's also something we'd like to support businesses in making good decisions, which is why Surfrider has been such a really great partner to help educate businesses on what their options are. When you're going to supply a reusable bag, what type of reusable bag are you supplying, as well as paper bags. I mean, we're not putting a minimum post-consumer recycled content limit. Like, so other communities have said, if you're going to sell a paper bag, it must be 40% post-consumer recycled content. We have said you can just sell any kind of paper bag, but I think there has to be some kind of initiatives around awareness and education to the business community around what they're purchasing and what they're supplying. So a lot of that will come with an education piece, and we're planning on providing tip sheets and a lot of support to sort of make those decisions a little bit easier, working with the suppliers that already come out here. But it's not something we're adding to the bylaw itself. It'll be sort of more of a support role.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a lot of work, and we really appreciate it. And to Surf Rider, Lily, you and your team, thank you. Wow. Okay.
The recommendation, yeah, that the District of Tofino Single-Use Plastic Regulation Bylaw number 1263-2019 be introduced and read for a first time.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. First reading. Any final comment or questions? All right, all in favor? Thank you. None opposed? Motion carried. And the second piece of this.
Sure. That staff recommend that staff implement the communications plan attached as Appendix 2 to the report District of Tofino Single-Use Plastic Bylaw dated February 26, 2019 in order to obtain stakeholder feedback prior to second reading and schedule an opportunity for representations to Council prior to third reading.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any questions about that or about the communications plan? No. All in favor? None opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Yay. Okay, you can say one, you know, like you could just clap. Or, no, just kidding.
No, thank you. We're really excited to continue working with you, so thank you so much.
Thanks, Lily. Okay. So our next item is an application for change to food primary license to allow patron participation at the Tofino Resort Marina. And we have a report from Protective Services. So for returning counselors, we're very familiar with this because we've seen this kind of thing before. And we understand that we have the ability to undertake consultation or engagement with the neighbors to see what the feedback is, or we can just permit that to happen through the, now what's it called, the Cannabis and Liquor
and Cannabis Regulation.
Yeah, not the LC, yes, anyways, it has a name. So, did you have any opening comments you wanted to make?
I don't have a presentation prepared at all, just the basic facts of this one. There's a letter from the General Manager, Daniel Vogel, who's in attendance here today as well too, that just to be clear, this allowance for patron participation is to provide the opportunity for dancing so that they can actually have some of the weddings and events in the restaurant space where they currently cannot have that because it doesn't allow for dancing. So we're not looking at a change of hours or extension of any of those sorts of things. It's just to allow for that opportunity so that weddings and that are not having to take place in the pub where that is actually allowed. So that's it.
Thanks. Did anyone have any questions? All right. So anyone want to move the recommendation to receive the report for information?
I'll step up to the plate that the report titled Application for Change to Food Primary License to Tofino Resort Marina 1909 Kitchen and Upper Hatch to allow patron participation dated February 26, 2019 be received for information.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed? Motion carried. All right, the Firewood Retail Regulation Bylaw. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I don't think that was clear, that at the end of that report is actually the two.
Oh, do we have to do the whole?
So either you want to gather those
Oh,
things yourself.
I'm sorry.
or-
Okay, moving too fast. Okay, so what's your opinions? Is there any interest in the municipality undertaking the gathering information? Or, please.
Can I ask which is more advantageous? Like one, obviously, we're not using staff time, but I couldn't tell from the letter what directly they were seeking. Which one is preferable?
Good question. You're absolutely right. If we undertake it ourselves, then it does use some staff time. Over the last 6 years, it's been the preference of council to not go that direction generally, unless it was something that was particularly concerning. Great. So if there's anything about the application that is particularly concerning that you think warrants, then I would suggest we choose the other option. And we'll need a motion.
I'll move option 2, that the LCRB advise the LCRB that the Tofino does not wish to provide comments using draft resolution number 2.
Thank you. Second. Moved and seconded that we will not provide comments. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carried. Thank you. Thanks, Elise.
Mayor Osborne, on the next item, I'm going to declare a conflict of interest because I am a purveyor of firewood.
Okay. Now that is something we just never heard before in the council chambers.
Okay, so I don't actually have a presentation for this one either. I think it's relatively straightforward, but we have talked a number of times over the last little while about beach fire strategies and that sort of thing. One of the pieces that came out from December 11th was the resolution to create opportunities for education, and I think what we're looking to do with this potential bylaw here is really one piece of the education part. So by creating the bylaw, which would require retailers as well as people that are supplying complimentary firewood for the purpose of campfires to post this information, the municipal and provincial regulations, would be a big step forward in getting the information out there to all those that are visiting as well as those that are already living here and are having regular beach fires, of exactly what is required of them, what their responsibilities are, and what potential consequences may be for not following those regulations. So that's where we're at today. So if you do have any questions about the proposed bylaw, please.
Thank you. I have one question, but Councillor Steer's going to ask his first.
Okay. It's a comment and question. Just thank you once again for the work and that the positive feedback and engagement from the community obviously helped to support this. The question, there is kind of two parts, and I like the fact that it's very cost reasonable on this initiative. There's two parts. One is there, as a continuum, are there other initiatives that you are working on presently? I can see this as one component of probably a larger strategy, and just curious as to if there are other plans. You don't have to share them all, but yeah.
No, absolutely. I think for a while I've been quite open about the fact that we do need better signage to indicate at our points of access for these public beaches that beach fires either are or are not permitted, and where they are permitted, what the conditions of those fires. So going along with the information when we create a poster that may be available for some of the retailers and that, we're working on right now getting some signage out there that actually illustrates what those regulations are. So in the report there was a link to the province website for the fire bans and restrictions, and they provide a PDF flyer that can be downloaded, made into posters and that sort of stuff. Our regulations are basically the exact same, with the additional one of burning of driftwood, strictly prohibited. So we're looking at something like that can be in place at the public beaches. We've spoken with the Resort Association as well too, and Tourism Tofino about having the same signs that we create at district access points on private access points as well too. I haven't had the chance to get through with April yet, because she's been ill, but there's potential for RMI money to be used for the signs on the private sector because they are directly addressing visitors. So.
And just follow up to the initiative itself. Is there? I'm always thinking about how do we track success, you know, in an activity that we're undertaking, and is there anything that we can do to track success in this initial stage of the education process?
It's a tricky one in this area. What I can draw on from this point to be able to gauge success was, I feel personally that we had more success this past summer than we did previous summers. And I think a big part of that was there was at least one resort at one end of Mackenzie Beach that was actually providing provincial regulations that they've taken upon themselves to tape it onto a bucket. One of the regulations is a minimum of 8 liters of water be readily available at your fire. And so Ocean Village Resort, they had purchased some buckets. They took the printouts, the PDF flyer from the provincial site, taped it right on the buckets and made the buckets available to all of the people from the resort that wanted to have fires in them. So where we saw the changes was when the bylaw staff in the previous year, where it could take them an hour and a half to walk the length of Mackenzie Beach because there was so many infractions in that, people just not being aware. They were finding that the information was getting out there, and when they got to that area of the beach, and this is just one example, but when they got to that area of the beach, those people had the information. They had taken the steps to be, doing the things that had been asked of them in order to have that fire. So there was less educating on the bylaw that was required in those particular circumstances. And then at the time to clean up and put the fires out at the end of the evening, it was also much quicker because people were aware of everything. They went to start their fire with all of that knowledge, and so I think that's the best case that I can show so far for the improvements and tracking things. Okay.
Why did we have to create an individual bylaw as opposed to amending the business regulation bylaw?
Well, we had some discussions around that one for sure. Our business license regulation bylaw is currently being worked on to be renewed and updated, but I think that between Elise and myself, we felt that there were so many amendments to the business license regulation already that it may start to get a little bit confusing, and this was a good, simple opportunity for a standalone bylaw for this particular one that may not turn around and get changed in
Got it.
a few months or.
Thanks. Okay, thanks very much. I don't think there's any other questions.
The District of Tofino Firewood Retail Regulation Bylaw number 1262, 2018 be introduced and read for a first and second time.
Second. Thank you. Any final questions? All in favor? Thank you. None opposed. Motion carried.
And then I'll move that the District of Tofino MCI or Bylaw Notice Amendment, Bylaw number 1107.10, 2019 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Second. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed. Motion carried. Can you grab Councillor Anderson for me, please, Sarah? And then I'll actually.
What's that?
Sure. Do you want to take a 2-minute recess? Anybody?
Cool.
Okay. All right. I'm actually going to declare conflict on the next item because of the proximity of the property. So at this point, we can. Councilor Quaid can come in. Oh, hang out.
That's okay.
We just did, yeah. No, 2 minutes.
I think because we were sitting in here, you couldn't go to the beach. She was just in the car, and I told I could give you lots of treats to go out and check on her, but I knew you had to sit here. But then come to me right afterwards. I'll come show you your house.
So you also go with the ground meeting?
Basically,
Question about dropping pens on.
Are you guys on?
Yeah, I know a lot about that.
Yeah, so I.
So we'll blame it on you one.
I was taking it after. Yeah. Just be the face of the opposite of the offer.
Making a brochure.
Yes,
Sort of the background.
that's why I don't need to take holidays.
Early 2000s. Well, we're getting a second connection today. So, very excited. Everything that we had in emails like months ago. Yeah, I kind of don't really know what it is.
That's a good idea.
I kind of get it. It's nice up there. It is nice up there. My friends, it's just like, oh, I'm going for like non-alcoholic outdoor adventures. You should come. And I was like, that's exactly my thing. I have a job. Thank you.
But I was really fortunate because
Summer support. Yeah.
So is that,
We have actually a song.
well, you always get kind of ready for it.
Has anybody been
No, I asked, the last meeting,
At least.
I'll show you how it is.
Councilor McQuaid. Hi, quick question.
Yeah.
Thanks for asking.
You're welcome. You have a wonderful day.
You as well.
Splatter all over there.
Oh. Give me something to do. She yelled at us.
What do you think already?
Friday. Good, yeah.
And I was
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna
I've been smoking.
I've heard that.
I know, I'm just can't wait. Yeah. And then we're gonna get those.
I'm going to call this meeting back to order at 11:56 so we can keep rolling here. The mayor's declared conflict on item 8.6, the development variance permit, due to her proximity to that property. So we're just going through, I believe this is the, oh, yeah. And you have a presentation.
I have a presentation.
Great.
Another really short one. This is a presentation for a development variance permit that's related to an ongoing rezoning application. The rezoning application is also on today's agenda for final reading if this variance permit moves forward, and this variance was requested by council to be done before final reading. So we're looking at the first DVP of the year, it's 0119. You can look forward to 1 month from now exactly, March 26th, where we'll be reviewing 7 of these. We'll try to move through our development queue as fast as possible, so you can use this as practice. This is related to, as I said, to zoning bylaw amendment 1242. The zoning itself is in place to permit a subdivision. The variance in front of the council today is to vary a side setback from 4.2 meters to 2.13 meters, and it's for a building that's existing. So it was built a number of years ago, and this is within the side setback. This was built at the time when the district of Tofino wasn't required surveys, and people were kind of building, they were guesstimating where their lot lines were. So this is one of those. What we do with our development variance permits is run them through a criteria table. These criteria are pulled from the official community plan, and we just sort of try to match up their proposal to these criteria. So the first criteria is that it preserves the form and character of a street, area, neighborhood. The proposed variance will be in line with the existing neighborhood. I'm sorry to let you read these, but this next one's about protection and preservation of natural features. And again, this building existing, so there's going to be no effect to the natural world. It's not in a DPA area. Again, design siting is not going to change because the building is built. Siting, again, privacy, the building will be built for a number of years. There is no adjacent building. There's a property, obviously, but no adjacent building. There's no changes to siting or views. And again, nothing's getting built, so we can't really allow for flexibility in building design. So there's that. Just sort of 2 views of the property we're talking about. So you can see the one to your right is, from further up. That's the building adjacent to the neighboring property. And then sort of zoom in on it, you can sort of see where it gets pretty close to that yellow line, which is a the side, which is the property line. Just to be, one thing to be clear of is that these property lines aren't exact. They're pretty close. If you survey it, you get the actual amount, which is what we require the applicant to do before applying for it, but you can sort of see how close it is. We provided notification to the neighbors on February 15th, as required by the Local Government Act. I have not heard back. Peter, I don't know if we haven't heard anything back from any of the neighbors. The adjacent neighbor to the north is also in the process. Was read by council last meeting for to permit a rezoning to also develop a new lot. So that's about it for the DVP. So this is a fairly simple one.
Just one question. When the variance goes with the building and not with the lot. So if what I'm thinking is, say the building was replaced or moved or anything in the future, or another, say it was torn down and was replaced by another building, could they replace the building with the same setbacks anywhere, or would it revert back to the former setbacks?
Yeah, what we do is we make sure when we issue the permit and attach it, we talk about exactly what's happening to this building, to this area. So it's not like a blanket words, it actually has the survey itself attached to it. And so in the future, they'd have to build to a 4.5 meter setback.
And if the building was added on to, if there's an addition?
4.5 meter setbacks, unless they give the council to apply for a variance.
Yeah, okay.
Any other questions? To move the recommendation?
I will move that the council approve development variance permit number 0119 to vary District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770, 1997 for Lot 1, District Lot 122, Claflot District, VIP 68981 as follows. Vary part 19.62 of the District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770, 1997 to decrease the minimum side yard for the caretaker's cabin from 4.5 meters, 15 feet to 2.13 meters, 7 feet as shown on Exhibit A to DVP 0119.
Second.
Any further questions? All in favor? Passed.
I don't know if Josie will comment. The Community Emergency Preparedness Fund. Another difficult request from our staff to support an application that will do good things in our community. Did you have any opening comments, Keith?
I have a few if you'd like to. Yeah, okay.
Please. We don't often get a chance to
I don't often get a chance
I think it would be great.
Keith always has a presentation ready, but you guys don't want to hear it, so you never get to do it.
And I knew that, which is why I asked it today.
Well, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm here today to ask for a resolution to support an application to the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund to build capacity for the District of Tofino's Emergency Operations Center. The Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, the CEPF, is a suite of funding programs that is intended to enhance the resiliency of local governments and their residents in responding to emergencies. Funding is provided by the province of BC and is administered by the Union of BC Municipalities, UBCM. There's 5 streams of funding, and we've applied to all of them at one point or the other. There's emergency social services, emergency operations centers, evacuation route planning, flood risk assessment, mapping and mitigation planning, and structural mitigation. A council resolution is required to complete the application process. Staff has called upon council on 5 other occasions to ask for resolutions to support applications to the numerous streams, which have all been successful today, totaling $250,000. This includes $150,000 to complete coastal flood mapping and flood construction levels for land use and risk mitigation purposes, which is just finished. Another grant for $25,000 providing for supplies at our reception center, and for more training of our emergency social services volunteers, which is also just wrapped up. A subsequent ESS grant for $25,000 to develop an emergency social services disaster support hub, which we applied for in early 2019 and got as well. And $25,000 received through the first intake of the Emergency Operations Center's funding stream in 2018, which is also just completed. So this is now the second intake of that funding stream. And again, it provides up to $25,000 to continue the work of building local capacity of the EOC and an improvement of resources that we began in 2018. The District of Tofino provides an EOC, an Emergency Operations Center, within its geographic boundaries in order to meet our legal obligations under the Emergency Program Act, as well as under the Local Authority Emergency Management Regulations. The EOC is a physical location designated by the District of Tofino where key personnel from involved departments or agencies gather to collaboratively support site activities, coordinate information, and provide strategic direction during an emergency or disaster. So the need to develop the capacity of the EOC has been recognized in the district's emergency program guide, objectives 5.1 through 5.4. And those are specifically to identify EOC members and alternates, establish EOC facilities and equipment, train EOC and other personnel, conduct exercises, and debrief. These recommendations, the evaluation of the EOC training that we've done over the past year, and EOC team member input has highlighted several areas for improvement of the program that inform the objectives for this proposed project. And there's three objectives. The first objective is to continue training of the EOC members. So training and exercising increases EOC members' confidence, promotes retention, and is key to having an operationally ready program. In 2018, 14 District of Tofino staff members were trained to the highest level of competency through 5 full-day training sessions, culminating in a multi-agency exercise with 38 participants throughout the region. The benefit of this is considerable. The benefit of this considerable volunteer commitment made by the District of Tofino staff was demonstrated in how effectively the windstorm in December of 2018 was managed. From public safety messaging to damage assessments to claims submitted to the province for more than $30,000 in response and recovery expenses. So that's, in my time here, that's the first that I've experienced a claim submission of that size. Many of our volunteer EO staff are here today. You're in the room, pretty much everyone. So thank you very much for your services to the community. The continuity of this training into 2019 is required to maintain the growth realized by the EOC program over this past year. All training and exercising opportunities are offered regionally to the Tloquit, Howzit, the Heshquit First Nations, District of Equid, and to the Parks Canada as well. So the second objective of this proposed project is the purchase of equipment to enhance EOC effectiveness and resilience, specifically an additional EOC information officer kit, increased printing and scanning ability for the primary functions within the EOC, and auxiliary power in the event of a no power situation to run our portable EOC kits that we obtained through this same source of funding in 2018. And finally, the third objective is purchase of equipment to enhance public messaging capacity and communications with responding agencies and emergency social services. And this includes the purchase of broadcast equipment to expand the reach of our public safety messaging, and also the purchase of peripherals to develop 2 VHF base station radios to ensure reliable, yet still portable communications with responders in the field. So in sum, this grant opportunity through the CEPF would help build capacity in districts' human and capital resources and enhance our organizational readiness in responding to an emergency. If received, the grant would provide $25,000 and fund 94% of the $26,750 project cost. The District of Tofino's contribution would be $250 from our 2019 emergency program operating budget and $1,500 in kind and staff time. Thank you again for your time and for your support of the district emergency program. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions?
$250, huh?
All right, well, I'm just gonna go out on a limb here and say this is a no-brainer. Okay.
I'll move that staff be authorized to submit an application to the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund to continue building local and regional capacity for the District of Tofino's Emergency Operations Center, EOC, through training and the purchase of equipment.
Moved and seconded. All right. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed. Motion carried. Thank you. Thanks very much, Keith. Okay, next on our agenda are the Emergency Program Management Committee minutes from back in December for receipt. That's all.
Move that the minutes of the Emergency Program Management Committee meeting held December 13th, 2018 be received.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any questions that came out of the minutes? No. Great. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed. Motion carried. Okay, into bylaws. And the first is the District of Tofino Zoning Amendment Bylaw 1258, 2019 for third reading. Any opening comments you want to make, or?
I think just that once this is read, it'll stop until we've dealt with the appeal from South Chesapeake Beach condos.
Okay.
Yeah, it's dependent on part 4. It's very
Right.
connected to
Yes.
part 4 of the zoning.
Okay. I recall this well. Any questions for anyone? Nope. Okay.
I move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1258, 2019 be read a third time.
Okay. Great. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed. Motion carried. All right. I'm going to declare a conflict on this final adoption due to the proximity of the property to my own.
So this is adoption. We don't have a presentation there.
No, sorry.
Just maybe.
Great.
Okay, I'll move the recommendation that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1242, 2018 be adopted.
I'll second that.
Any other questions, concerns? No? All in favor? So moved.
Okay, so in April is the ABICC convention, and the terms of our remuneration bylaw require us to authorize members of council to attend and being reimbursed for their expenses. And the general convention has been that any member of council that wishes to go to ABICC can do so. So is there anyone who is not planning on going?
I'm debating.
You're debating, so that means you don't know yet. So I think the most appropriate thing to do would just be, if council agrees, then to consider the resolution that up to 7 members of council be authorized, etc. I'll move it.
Is accommodation available?
Yes, yeah, so the accommodation's been booked, and then anyone who doesn't go, it can be unbooked, and it won't cost us anything. All right, I will move then that up to 7 members of council be authorized to attend the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities 2019 Annual General Meeting and Convention, April 12th to 14th, 2019, in Powell River, and be reimbursed for costs in accordance with the District of Tofino Council Remuneration Bylaw 1254, 2018.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed. Motion carried. So our staff will work with us to get us registered, because usually you have to pick sessions. So if everyone could please go online and determine what you want to go to, and it doesn't mean you actually have to go to them when you get there, because you can kind of move around a lot, but they just like to know for numbers' sake. Fabulous, thanks. Okay, so now we have 4 verbal reports to give from members of council who are sitting on external bodies, and we'll start with Councillor McMaster and the Vancouver Island Regional Library.
So I attended the annual general meeting of the Regional Library on January the 19th. That was my first meeting for me at the Library Board. It was a typical AGM. 100 delegates had to have a photograph taken, which took a while. And then we had the election of officers to the Executive Committee. And then a presentation of the financial and strategic plan. Points of interest for Tofino in the strategic plan. We are scheduled for a new library in 2021. I think we've heard things like that before and things have got in the way. I know I was sought out by the chair and vice chair of the library board, and I know there are some concerns about whether the CBT will be able to meet the expectations. So Bob was looking into that. I've seen some correspondence between Bob and the CBT, and he was going to talk to them, but then he went away. I know he hadn't talked to them before he went away.
Okay. We'll get an update after.
Yeah. For points of interest, total circulation of the Tofino library was 30,297 items were circulated. They estimate the value of a library card in Tofino is $582. Across the board, hard copies circulation is going down, digital copies is going up. Everybody's used to that.
Thank you.
So any questions?
Okay. Councillor Steer, the Tofino Harbour Authority.
Yes. So we had a board meeting on February 4th, and we have been working on proposed new bylaws, and we've been reviewing. There were our old bylaws, and there was some draft that was put together by the staff. It's an important document that I've been relying on staff to help me with in looking there. So that was discussed. We made quite a few amendments to the proposed bylaws, and we're now at our next board meeting, which I will go into, we will be approving those. There has, at the last board meeting, there was a request from the Taquiat Fisheries, and it's First Nations Fisheries that wants to add some infrastructure down at 4th Street, and so because this was fairly new, and that with a relationship with Small Craft Harbour and infrastructure, so we formed a subcommittee to address that, and it was basically a direct conversation with the Taquiat Fisheries, met down in the dock, and moved forward on that. There was also discussion around, there's been some around membership, and so there was a discussion around how can we engage the membership and in fact attract more members, and how to streamline process for that. And so one of the board members was tasked to carry that out. There was some very good news. We had the Harbour Authority Association of BC had their big hoo-ha in Ucluelet at Blackrock about 2 weeks ago, maybe a bit more. And our manager, our harbour manager, Maddie Prince, and I will read out the award that she received as an up-and-comer regional distinction award. Basically, she was singled out. She's done a tremendous job in the year and a half that she's been at the helm of the 4th Street Dock or Tofino Harbour Authority. It was recognized that she's taken it to a much higher level of administrative integrity, and she was awarded, and everyone was very proud of her. Then there's that was the gist of what that meeting. We're now have our next board meeting, very quick succession, because Small Craft Harbours will have representation. They happen to be in the area, so anytime that we have the ability to have them at the table, we take advantage of. So our next scheduled board meeting is February 28th at the community hall. We're using the new space up there, and that'll be at noon on February 28th, and there will be Small Craft representation there. There was discussion at the board meeting that I had with staff about this council hasn't had, but just previous to last year, the Small Craft Harbor and Tofino Harbor Authority came and did a presentation to council. I thought it was I happened to be here for that, but it was very informative, so I've asked, and staff are very happy to come and give an update onto the progress and to inform new council members about what the Harbor Authority does and the relationship to the community. Any questions?
Has the divestiture come up at all?
It has, and it's in, so the divestiture, there are two specific docks here. We know them locally as Crab Dock and Wing and Lane. The small craft harbors, and maybe to summarize, they have core assets up and down the British Columbia coast. There are literally hundreds of small harbors and assets that they have. Those that aren't really fulfilling the core mandate, which is to provide service to the commercial fishing industry. There's some discussion about how that has changed on the face of the coast here. And those two docks have been deemed not meeting the core mandate, and that they were looking to divest those. And at this stage, there was sort of a hierarchy, and the district is in there, but First Nations were at sort of the top end of that. So there are discussions right now between small craft harbors and First Nation groups here in Tofino, looking at what that divestiture to those groups might look like. There's been no update, and that will be at this board meeting. It will be one of the things that will be coming on the agenda.
Perfect, thanks. Any other questions? No. Okay. Tourism Tofino. So no, I'm the rep.
No, for
oh, I'm so sorry. I skipped right past you. The Wickeninish Community School Society. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. Short meeting, short report.
Yeah,
great.
So it was my first meeting with them. We met last week, and in short, since they took on Ann Weeks, the entire board unanimously feels that they're really hitting stride with the programs. I'm so pretty happy with it. One thing that came up that was really interesting is the after-school programs with the youth is going great, but the 7 to 9 drop-in, they actually have trouble filling spots, which I thought was really interesting with the conversation we're having about the RAP facility. So initially I'd asked them to come and for Ann Weeks to give us a delegation. They were thinking in the fall, but I suggested with the big decisions that we're going to be making with the rec center that they maybe come and present and sort of address that, whether or not it's communication issues when the programs were canceled a couple years ago, if it's follow-up from that, and really looking more into why they're not filling spots. And there you go, that's my report.
Thanks. That's important. Any questions? No. Thanks for inviting them. I think that would be great to have them come. We haven't had a delegation from the Wickeninish Community School Society in a few years.
And did ask me when a good time would be.
She could work with Jamie on that. Yeah, perfect. Jamie will help her out. Thanks. All right, Tourism Tofino. The AGM is coming up on March 26th, at which time Councillor Chalmers, as Britt Chalmers, will be leaving the board. So yesterday, we both attended a board meeting, but that would be Britt's last meeting. And as it turns out this year, there's a whole new election process, and so 8 of the new directors have been acclaimed, but there will be an election for 3 of the at-large directors, and it's all done electronically. So the members of Tourism Tofino, 260, 270 of them, will each get an electronic ballot and then vote that way. There'll be bios, and you'll select the 3, and then the results will be announced at the AGM. So that'll be interesting. Online elections, first time in Tofino that I've heard of this being used. The Visitor Information Center is on budget and it's on time, and it is estimated to be completed at the end of May. However, the staff has to leave the office they have right now before then, so they're going to operate temporarily out of, basically out of a trailer, I guess, for a couple months in a temporary unit. And if you go online to Tourism Tofino, and I'll send the link around, but you can read the results of the 2018 Visitor Intercept Survey. So that's the survey that was done between June and September and gives all kinds of great details about party size and composition, visitor origin, occupation, income, purpose of visit, length of stay. So for example, 3.3 days is the average length of stay during that time period. And then some other really interesting stats that are very useful for us too. So for example, there's been about an 800% increase in visitors arriving by bus from fall 2016 to summer 2018. And the rationale is probably because when Tofino Bus took over other routes, there were better connections being made from places like Victoria and Vancouver, and so it's easier for people to arrive to Tofino not using their car. Interesting, hey? 85% of people are arriving in a vehicle, either rent or own, and unsurprisingly, the closer you live to Tofino, the more likely you are to arrive in a personal vehicle, so Vancouver Island versus the rest of BC. And other fascinating statistics. One that surprised me a little bit was actually that there were more international visitors than there were American visitors. So I had always thought that there would be more American visitors than international, but that was not the case. And then last but not least, that Intercept survey actually formed part of the information that went into a very detailed economic impact study that's going to be released probably in a couple of weeks, and has very valuable data that we will be able to use to inform decisions on tourism management strategies. But we've seen a draft of the report. It's just not ready for public release yet. But it details, for example, the number of jobs, the number of full-time equivalents, the wages that are being made in the region and in Tofino, the amount of taxes that are being collected and remitted to all levels of government, visitation numbers, and I think it's going to do some good myth busting. So, for example, we toss out the number of million visitors all the time. This is a very, very detailed study that actually gives a more accurate estimate of the number of visitors, and it is not as high as 1 million. So I'll leave it at that. Okay. Question period. We lost our audience. Any questions, anyone? All right, so perhaps someone can move the recommendation, the motion to move into the closed section.
Move that the meeting be closed for the public pursuant to sections 91G of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to litigation, potential litigation, and Victoria municipality.
Thank you.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you, no opposed, motion carried. All right.